let's dig let's dig down into more specifics, and I've got a long list here. So let's just start off with what you see going on between South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, which all relate then to China.
Yes, okay. South Korea, Taiwan, Japan are all important pieces of the puzzle. Remember that the US is escalating to war with China, and it is relying on proxies both to instigate and to fight the war. The key thing to note there is that, for example, South Korea has 600,000 troops under conscription, another 3.1 million troops in reserve. All of these troops fall under US operational control. The US has them the moment that it wants to use them. The US also has about 28,000 troops stationed inside of Korea among, 50 odd bases. And the South Koreans pay about $1.2 billion every year for the privilege of being occupied. Trump wants to raise the cost of that ninefold to $10 billion a year. That's a lot of money, even for South Korea. It's a significant portion of its defense budget. So that has the potential to be a deal breaker. And this is what the deep state hates about Donald Trump is he's just so open about it. He referred to South Korea as a money machine. And it's very clear that he's just in it for the money. And, this, as I said, it could be a deal breaker for the Koreans first, because the South Korean population are furious with President Yoon Suk-yeol for subordinating South Korea's political and economic interests to U.S. foreign policy, this belligerent policy of war. And if he, decides to hand over the 10 billion, he will probably be impeached. And on the other hand, if he doesn't pay up, the US and the US administration weakens its support of Yoon or even withdraws its troops. The South Koreans will probably rise up and overthrow him, as they have done before with many other US quisling presidents. And they're actually very close to this right now, even as we speak. Yesterday, there was a demonstration of 200, 300,000 people in Seoul demanding the resignation of Yoon Suk-yeol. And so if South Korea is weakened, if that alliance, quisling alliance, is interfered with, if Trump throws sand into those gears, then this diminishes the strength of the empire to project force in that quadrant of the Pacific. And so that's one piece that is significant here. And as a parenthetical remark, this notion of North Korean troops fighting in Ukraine, which is a complete and total canard, this is probably an attempt by the South Korean National Intelligence Services to heighten the stakes and to promote South Korea's status and to enmesh Korea into the Ukraine NATO empire train wreck in order to kind of salvage the remnants of Yoon's legitimacy from an international standpoint. So there's quite a bit that's going on there. So that's South Korea. And then the other piece is Japan. And again, Japan has a very similar kind of situation. They pay for the privilege of being occupied and abused by US troops. There are 99 odd bases in Japan, 40,000 troops. And the Japanese pay this money to the US and they call it Omiori Yosan. It means empathy contribution to the US, as if the US, was deserving of empathy. But what happens is, US troops are extraordinarily abusive around the world, certainly in Japan. Earlier in the year, there was, rape scandal, Marines, kidnapped, a young child and then raped her. And so, this kind of continued outrage for which Japan is paying for. And the Japanese quote unquote burden sharing, is up for renegotiation in a couple of years too. And if Trump asks for more money, then that will engender the same rage and outrage as it will in Korea. And this is compounded by the fact that the current ruling party, LDP, is probably at its weakest in decades. The LDP is the US Quisling government. It's had virtual one party control of Japan since 1955, but it is actually at its weakest in decades. It's lost control of the lower house, and it will have difficulty, putting together a functioning government. And so that again, is already a weakness that could be weakened even more if Trump comes forth with a very transactionalist demand. And then the other piece is Taiwan. Taiwan is the centerpiece of this US provocation against China. It's literally the chin of US China relations. And it's the center of an arc of encirclement along the first island chain. But Trump, in his mind, sees Taiwan simply as another free rider. He says that the US is no different from an insurance company, and that the Taiwan authorities need to pay the United States for protection. And he wants them to spend 10% of the GDP on the military. 10%. That's an extraordinary amount. And of course, this is a coded demand to buy more marked up US weapon systems. But he considers them to be free riders, that they've simply, stolen US technology and now they're getting US protection for free and they need to pay more. And this is going to throw the ruling DPP into a loop because, they've cast their lot with the Biden neocons and they've done everything they've asked for. And if Trump comes through and makes this exorbitant demand, which will be very hard for them to meet, again, not only will they be bewildered and confused, but their legitimacy, their political legitimacy could also be challenged. So it's all these different things that Trump risks throwing a wrench into the machine. Now, whether he will be allowed to, perhaps, the neocons around him may, try and bind him and put him into a straitjacket. But if he is allowed to run wild in the China shop, then he will certainly break things and create significant damage.
So he might with this, and I think the alliance is called JACUS.
Yes,
So he might undermine that alliance, which then takes pressure off of China.
it's possible. He could undermine the Japan, Korea, US alliance. There's AUKUS, there's JACUS, just JAFAS. There are all these, what the US calls minilateral alliances. They're usually trilateral alliances that it wants to stitch together into one kind of pan-Asian NATO. And Trump prefers to have, bilateral alliances, one for one, and then he wants a very, very clear mercantile bean counting relationship with each one of them. He doesn't want to give them anything for free. This is very different from the neocon agenda, which really sees things in geostrategic terms, whereas Trump sees things from the standpoint of business. And just to give a kind of my little generic, analysis, I believe that the kind of household and the upbringing that people have affects their worldview. And if you recall, Trump's father was a landlord. He was a slumlord, had thousands of apartment units in New York. And Trump probably grew up watching his father collect rent and kick out deadbeats. And so from his mind, you're either paying rent, and if you're paying rent, you should pay more. And if you're a deadbeat, you should get kicked out. And I think he's bringing that kind of real estate bean counting landlord mindset to his bilateral international relations,
Like you
which
did with NATO, really.
exactly. So NATO, same thing with NATO, right? And so these are things that could throw sand into the gears of the war machine. Another thing is, for example, the vice president of Taiwan Island, her name is Louise Xiao. She's kind of a deep state denizen, and she's the President William Lai's U.S. minder. But she's actually a preacher's daughter from New Jersey, and she calls herself the cat warrior. Okay, now if you recall what J.D. Vance said about, cat women, it's
Yeah, I mean,
not.
you can't make this up.
No, you can. You can. Yes. And, she had said that, she bet all her chips on Ukraine. She said the Ukraine war sends a powerful message to China, meaning the US is winning the Ukraine war, and this will send a message to China that Taiwan, too, like Ukraine, which Taiwan is in the process of being Ukrainized, Taiwan is going to kick China's butt. Well, the problem Ukraine, is a catastrophe. It's lost. And so essentially, Louis Xiao, by making this assertion, and now under the circumstances where there's a high probability that Trump will pull out, or at least, put Ukraine off the front burner, that sends exactly the opposite message. And so Louise Xiao, if she's sending a message, it's the message of a person, with their pants down, squatting in an outhouse that is being hit by a tornado. It's not the right message. And so, yeah, so there are multiple dimensions of this where Trump's capriciousness and mercantilism and transactionalism could actually gunk up the deep state neocon agenda.
Well, then
Yeah.
how does he and continue to antagonize China?
Oh, he will. I mean, the first thing is that he will increase trade tariffs, right?
Mhm.
His agenda boils down to two things. Building a wall against immigrants because he's, dead set against immigrants. That goes back 40 years. He's clearly a racist, anti-immigrant president. And then the other thing is he wants to construct a wall of tariffs against Chinese goods. Now, um, the current administration has this policy that it calls small yards, high fences, which is to say that what they do is they've taken certain sectors of the economy and essentially raised them to the level of sanctions or extremely high tariffs, essentially excluding them completely. What people have said about Trump is that he would not be doing small yard and high fences. He would be doing big yard and low fences, which is to say he would be doing tariffs on everything. The problem with tariffs is that if he raises tariffs against China, a couple of things could happen. First, we will see tremendous domestic inflation because anything that's imported from China, almost everything that we use on a regular consumer basis is imported from any manufactured good. Those prices will escalate perhaps double if that's 100% tariff or a 60% tariff. The other piece is that China actually doesn't need the US market. The US market is less than 2.5% of China's total export market. So they could actually decide not to engage with the US market, in which case the US will suffer the loss of imported goods. It's unclear whether it can do the import substitution by cultivating domestic manufacturing. I think that is really, really a long shot. But the other thing that will happen is that Trump wants to cut taxes for corporations, but you have to make that up somewhere else. And he expects to raise taxes through the trade tariffs. But if the trade doesn't come in, then he will not have those tariffs. In fact, if the tariffs are successful as they're meant to be, they're actually meant to serve as a barrier against foreign imports. This is the neo-mercantile mindset. Then he will actually have he will be the budgets will be severely imbalanced because he will have cut taxes without a corresponding tax increase through tariffs. And so there's a foundational, contradiction built in. And the other thing to remember is these tariffs are not simply aimed against China. They're aimed against the rest of the world, including, for example, the EU. The EU could see massive increase in tariffs. Taiwan could see massive increase in tariffs because Trump considers them to have stolen US, technology. And so in his mind, the neo-mercantile protectionism is that we build a wall of tariffs, we keep everything out, and theoretically that's supposed to, cultivate domestic, industries, but it won't happen. And so he's kind of setting the country up for failure in so many different ways.